Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Adam Pacton. I'm the Dean's Fellow for AI Literacy and Integration in the College of Integrative Sciences and Arts, or CISA, at Arizona State University. I'm joined today by my colleague and fellow CISA AI Task Force member, Stephen Carradini. Stephen is an associate professor in CISA in the School of Applied Professional Studies. He's affiliate faculty in the Hugh Downs School of Human Communication, and he's a senior Global Future Scholar. Thanks for joining me today, Stephen.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here and have a conversation about this really important topic.
So glad to have you here. And speaking of that topic, one of the aims of the CISA AI Task Force is to make our work visible and public. To that end, Stephen and I are going to chat today about AI disclosure and trust. We don't have anything prepared beyond a question or two because we want to capture the exploratory nature of our learning and working so that others might see that we can learn together publicly around AI, and maybe they can be inspired to do something similar. With that in mind, I'm going to kick us off and ask you the first question, Stephen. When you think about AI disclosure, what's the first metaphor or comparison that comes to mind? Is it like citing sources, wearing a name tag, or do you think it's something else entirely?
Yeah, so I do think about disclosure a lot, and I do think about metaphors for it. And I think that even though I don't love the actual metaphor, the first one that does come to mind is citing sources, because it's a framework that we're familiar with of here's where I got information, here's an explanation of how I got that information. I like the metaphor of sort of a conversation better, but obviously there are some challenges in thinking about who you're conversing with. I tend to think that it's a conversation between when we disclose, a conversation between the person who's writing the disclosure and the people who are reading the disclosure. But it doesn't sometimes end up being that sort of conversation. And that's partially because I don't think we've framed it as a conversation in a lot of ways yet.
See, and there's so much there that I want to dig into. So I'm glad you brought up a number of points. I think, conversation is sort of one of the dominant metaphors around citation, especially for those of us in writing, various types of writing fields. One question I have for you, sort of as a follow-up, is um, are we always having the same conversation? So, when we're talking two people together, we're often talking crosstalk or cross
Sure,
purposes.
sure.
So, if we have people in a workplace, for example, if we have C-suite people and we have sort of middle managers or we have other workers, uh,
Hmm.
how does that make it more complicated about who's disclosing and when, or does it?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this in terms of social processes all the time. I study implementation of emerging technologies in the workplace. So thinking about the relationship between frontline workers and managers, managers and executives, executives and frontline workers, these are things I'm thinking about all the time. And I think that a lot of this comes down to what we're looking for when we disclose or when people ask us to
Mhm.
disclose. So sometimes we want, especially in workplaces, like legal coverage, like we want to know that certain things have or haven't happened so that if we get in trouble, like we're good, like we have some baseline knowledge here. In other settings, it's more like academic settings, it's more about like the understanding of how the work was done. Although I think that's highly contested, right? And so I'm sure I know you have lots of thoughts about how work is done and what that looks like and what disclosures practices mean. But I think those are two very separate ways that the workplace and academia think about disclosure right now. Um, in a lot of workplaces that aren't adopting AI, disclosure is sort of vague and maybe not needed. In workplaces that are employing and top-down systematizing AI use, it's very varied. There might be people that say like, "Hey, this is an ethical thing we do. We disclose. It tells people everything they need to know." It might just be like, "Hey, this is how we work now. This is our workflow, and it doesn't need to be disclosed. It's part of what we do." And so And there's everything in between. Like some organizations have units that are heavily adopting AI and others that aren't, and things like this. And so I think disclosure is a very social practice, and it kind of devolves down to the smallest bit of like these people wanting these disclosures for these reasons. And I think when we have the biggest challenges is when the reasons for disclosing and the comfort level with disclosing for those reasons starts to clash. I think that's the biggest problem. Because if everybody's like, "Hey, I just wanted to know," and they're like, "Yeah, I used it," then like there's not really a problem. Like that's not the real problem of disclosure. It's when people start to not trust the work because you disclose, which we have some academic evidence that this is the case, along with anecdotal evidence. What do you do then? Do you disclose and take the reputational hit? Do you not disclose? There's a lot of gray area ethical concerns about how we do these social practices because is uh, you know is letting it go, just sort of not saying anything, is that an appropriate social practice in a context where like there's unclear rules? So there's just a lot. There's a lot about disclosure that is unclear. And like I told you before we started talking, like this is the number one thing I think about the most when it comes to AI is the relationships that people have between disclosure uh, agreements or failures.
So much good stuff there, Stephen. I think you've really, on the one hand, there are compliance and risk issues that you raise, and there's also issues of trust that cut both ways. And then there's
Yeah,
also that very simple reality that um, as we get divergence among workflows, comfort, knowledge, and literacies among AI, what it means to disclose can get very strange, for lack of a better term.
yeah,
Like you and I, for example, it would be hard for me at this point to pull out like did I use AI? I use it like somehow on everything. So it becomes for me much more of that sort of rhetorical act. Like why am I
yeah,
doing this? What is
yeah.
gained by doing this? But here's sort of the big elephant in the room question for you.
Sure.
How do we bridge some of those gaps, and how do we teach sort of this rhetorical elements of disclosure with
Yeah.
students when we have, we all of us have seen in the news, students seen a faculty member left part of an input on a course material that they had worked on with AI, and
Mhm.
that eroding all of the trust because
Yeah.
the student may not have as much knowledge in AI. So to back that up, simplify.
Yeah.
How do we approach this with students as we're beginning to teach them about disclosure?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go about it in a lot of different contexts. So I think that there's different levels of academic training that we do. When we do general studies education, we have certain expectations about what the learning process looks like there. And we have certain expectations of what assignment creation and development look like there, both from students and from faculty. And so I think those are very different than upperclassmen courses, 300 and 400 level courses, and then graduate level courses. So I think the first thing we have to do is explore the basis of our expectations around assignments and assigning, and think about why do we want to use or not use this tool. So when I teach 300 and 400 level courses, there are aspects where some assignments I say, hey, this is a assignment that it would be totally fine to use AI tools for. Just go do whatever you want with AI tools. But then when I teach client projects where we're working with someone's potential identifiable information and with a client's actual data, then they can't use certain types of AI tools because there are, even with sandboxing, which I'm very glad that AI tools at ASU have sandboxing. even with sandboxing, it's just not a good practice to get into is to start using publicly, personally identifiable information in terms of like generating outputs. This is how many organizations have gotten themselves in hot water with themselves, like Samsung. And so there's like general practices around what we expect just as a general policy of good hygiene and good safety in AI tools. And then there's the understanding of how we learn and what we're trying to learn. And there's complexities there, of course, because not everybody has the same view of what it means to learn a 100 level course or what the goals of a 200 level course should be. And so I think, and that's why I want to come back to the idea of conversation is that we can't just like assume these things magically between faculty or between students and faculty or even between like administrators and faculty when we're talking about this stuff. Like there's a lot built into disclosure that's not really about disclosure. It's about like what are the perceptions that we have about learning, about creation, about developing knowledge, about skills, about vocation. Like it starts to get at like what are we doing here? Why do we want to do this assignment? Why do we want to be here in this course? And then it all cascades down from there. And that sounds like a lot, but you start to peel back the layers of like why do we want to disclose? And you keep going farther and farther down until you're like, well, what are we doing here? Like what's the point of being here? And then from there you can say like, oh, well, they're learning how to work with clients. They better not use AI for that in certain contexts because we don't want to say, oh yeah, we put in your annual reports to ChatGPT, like that's not going to make them happy. Even if that's safe, which in a sandbox might be safe, but there's perceptions, there's good habits. So that's a long and winding answer, but I think the real answer about how we talk to our students, which is what you asked, is we start to have those conversations about what's the context of use for this assignment in this course? What's the context of use in the workplace? How do these things match up? How do they not match up? Sometimes I feel like they will intentionally not match up because there are certain types of things we learn that are different than doing things vocationally. I think that's part of the educational process. I think there are other times where we're learning vocational skills and we're pointing directly towards this is how it will be done in the workplace. We need to do it that way because the employers who are talking to us are expecting you to know this when we get there. So I think there's a lot of give and take about how to get the students to understand that there are lots of different contexts that they exist in academically and professionally at any given time.
Stephen, something that you just showed us, and you called it a rabbit hole, but I think it was very salient and something that's very revealing that I'm seeing more and more as I work with AI, which is one of the key values is not the direct use itself, but it's what it reveals. And
Mm,
one of the things that you're pointing to is a tension between uh, implicit culture and behaviors and explicit policy. And, we see this in workplace all the time. We see
yeah.
this in higher ed, especially.
Mm,
How do we confront the fact that we have really diverse policies around use and disclosures across classes in higher ed? Like that's something that I
yeah.
struggle with in my courses. I tell my students like, hey, I'm learning AI with you. You all may come up with uses and reasons for use that I don't see. So like, as long as you're not whole cloth having the AI do the work for you, like it's good. Let me know. Let's talk about it and run with it. So how do we address this? If we think about trust a bit more capaciously,
Yeah.
how do we address the different kinds of trust and distrust that are
Yeah.
developing when students have that really differential experience with AI use?
Yeah. So when we study implementation of technology, like it's never a straight line. There's lots of different variations on how things go. Things go forward, things go back. Something bad happens and we pull back a little bit. Something good happens, we press forward. And so I think everyone who's working with AI or any tool that they're implementing is at a different point on their implementation journey, like their personal implementation journey. And that fits into an overall narrative of an organizational implementation journey. And so the larger the organization is, the more complex the implementation journey is going to be because there's just more people on their own implementation journeys. And so I think to some extent, plurality is good because this is also how students are going to experience the workplace when they get out into a very large workplace. They're going to experience some departments that are very in, some that are not, or if they have a top-down mandate, some people are like just kind of doing the bare minimum, other people are zooming ahead. This is a sort of normal expected process when it comes to implementing technology. So I think at some level, some plurality is good. Now, if there's too great of a divergence over a student's personal experience or a worker's personal experience, then it becomes very unclear what to do because you're being pushed into so many different contexts that it's hard to keep everything straight. And that's when people will either start to hide uses that they want to do, or they'll just pull all the way back and say, like, it's not worth trying to implement this thing. It's too difficult to do that right now. So I think that there need to be some reasonable expectations that are set across an institution, whether that's a workplace or university, that people can find themselves in, whether that's students or faculty or staff or anybody. And then within those boundaries, like students can identify, oh, this person is a person A, and policy A fits over here, policy B fits over here. But if there are too many policies, then it starts, I think, to get very difficult. I really like that ASU has given faculty options, language for options. I think that's the sort of thing that I like to see, and that students can see those and say, oh, this one is the same as my other class. Like it's very similar to my other class. So this is going to be a similar sort of environment. And this one is similar to this other class. They're definitely separate ideas. But it can, again, in a large organization, implementation is a complex journey, and some people respond really well to it, and some people have, like I said, that response to pull back or to just go way forward and just hide everything. And that's true of any sort of technology that's being implemented, like social media and these sorts of things back in the day was a similar process of like, how do we incorporate this? And so I think AI is definitely had some unusual uptake curves. But there are a lot of things that look similar in terms of implementing technologies.
I think that, one thing you said that I've been thinking about a lot, and I recently read The Opposite of Cheating, which is a fantastic book about AI implementation and sort of some of the different pressures for students to, you know, cheat when it makes sense in the age of AI, to use an
Right,
often AI generated phrase. And I think that tensioning between the uneven practices, between like looking at one's peers and seeing like, if I'm in that space where disclosure is punished, uh,
right,
other students are using this and not disclosing,
right.
like that takes the guardrails off. So I think
Yeah, it does. That is a big problem that I think about a lot. And that's why I try to take a middle ground, like I mentioned, on usage, especially in my upper division classes, and that in saying like, here's the reasons that we're using this, here's the reasons that we're not using this, like being very open about that. Because I don't want my students to get into a situation where they look at themselves abiding the rules, they look at somebody else not abiding the rules, and they feel like, well, I guess I got to break the rules now. Like, I don't want to put my students in that situation. I don't want to put myself in that situation where, like, if someone's disclosing, I feel like anyone who discloses is trying to do the right thing
yeah.
because you don't have to disclose in a lot of situations. So anyone who tries to disclose, especially in an academic environment, I'm giving them the full benefit of the doubt that this is something that they're trying to do the right way. sure, there are exceptions, there are variants, there's all these things, but I'm trying to give anyone who's doing disclosure full benefit of the doubt because you don't have to, and I know they see students who don't, and so to me, disclosure is not bad. It's great. It means that this is a student that is thinking about how their work relates to AI and to what they've produced and to the rules of the assignment, and they are saying to themselves, I feel like I want to say that this has been generated using AI in some way.
Yeah.
Obviously, we haven't even talked about all the variations of disclosure, like granular disclosure or overall disclosure, these sorts of things. I really don't think too much about that. I think about like the actual social process of like, what am I doing and saying when I disclose? And I think that I would love to normalize this idea that if you're saying, "Hey, I used AI over here," that's good. That's a good way of saying I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I'm not trying to hide things. Like these are tools that I want to use. Um, and so but yeah, it you can just you talk about disclosure, you start to go in a circle over and over again. It's because like you can never escape some of the social contexts that are well, I won't say never. Let me rephrase that. At this current moment, there are a lot of conflicting social pressures that make you think, well, like let's make disclosure okay. And then like what does that mean? Like, what does it mean if disclosure is okay? We don't know, right? Like, we don't have a framework for like good disclosure versus bad disclosure. We haven't even made it to disclosure yet. And so you start to like just do lots of loops about like, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? And like, I, that's sadly where we are right now in the conversation is like, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? Let's talk about that, negotiate it, figure it out, class by class, unit by unit, college by college. Like this is it's a tedious conversation at times.
See,
I'm not gonna lie.
I'm going to push back on two things. One, and this may be, I have a background in logic, so my sense of
Sure.
tedium is different than others. So I find this like very exciting stuff. Um,
Okay. Okay. Fair.
but
Fair.
I also, I don't think we're in a circular loops. I think it's closer to a spiral. I think we're getting closer and narrowing
That's
in
fair.
to
Yeah,
some core points. And something
I
that
do
you
think that's
said
true.
something you said really sticks with me, and I think it is the question of this era in education, which is why. So there's
Yeah.
this dynamic that is beginning to emerge, and we said earlier in our conversation that AI reveals elliptically sort of fissures and
Yeah.
fractures,
Underlying
and
tensions. Yeah.
yeah. And one of those is that in a lot of education, not just higher ed, students are put through performative exercises without being told why. Why am I doing this? Why do I need to do this? Why
Yeah.
does this need to happen in this way? So
Yeah.
I see this dynamic where we have to explain why,
Yeah.
because that creates the self-efficacy and it creates the
Yeah.
intrinsic motivation that gives students a clearer ROI for doing the thing than offloading. And then when they then feel that it is safe to disclose, we've got a virtual or a virtuous cycle on our hands instead of a
Yeah.
vicious cycle.
Yeah, I mean, motivations are huge, right? Like, you can move a big rock with enough motivated people, right? And so I do think that understanding student motivations better and not just like getting anecdotes from our classes, but like doing the research on like what are students thinking? Because oftentimes in the research that people are publishing where they've talked to students, they're aware. They see their other student peers doing things and they are or aren't okay with it. Some of them are very much trying to skill themselves up for what they see as a frightening workplace. Some are much more concerned with the concept of their own critical thinking and what it's doing to them. Like these are not just things that academics and ethicists and sociologists and researchers are wringing their hands about. Care about these things. And so I think talking to students and really getting that research whether it's lo-fi on your own in office hours research or in formal academic settings. I think that's super important because the I think the biggest disservice is for us to like just try to go at it with like limited information, whether that's our own limited information about students or about our own work. Because a lot of I do, like I said, I do a lot of stuff related to the workplace. And so I constantly have to talk to people in the workplaces and they ask me stuff, I ask them stuff, and this helps. And so I think that, I mentioned at the very beginning that this is a conversation. And I think it requires more conversations on more things. We can't just set down certain policies in our course and then let them sit and let them do the work. There was a time when that was true, like when that was a thing that you could expect a course or a policy to be sort of uniformly um, set into a university structure in a way that students and faculty understood. And so you didn't really even need to do anything but invoke the policy, and then people would understand. And I think this is partially where there's tensions is that, looping back around to things like academic dishonesty, we used to have a pretty clear definition of academic dishonesty. Um, and we don't have as clear a definition now, and that is disorienting. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you have a maximalist or minimalist view of what AI does. The fact that academic dishonesty is now an open question again is unusual, right? Like, we're like, this is like since search engines really is the last time that we had to go through this whole exercise, right? About like, how does this work? Like, what sorts of things work? And so I think that's another element, and that's part of implementation too, is you're trying to revise established knowledge, whether you like it or not, right? And I think there are a lot of or nots, even for um, a heavily innovative institution like ASU. I think there's situations where even, well, I look at things and say, man, I wish we didn't have to go back and revisit everything. And we should have to go revisit all of this, like every part of the syllabus, every part of the assignment. So there's a lot. It's a lot. Um, and so I do think that there's those challenges of implementation, especially with a technology that is such a workflow modifier as opposed to like a different output. Um, it's a lot. It's a big change.
Absolutely. Stephen, I want to keep things tight for those who have stayed with us this long.
Thank you.
But I do want to I want to close this out with one more question for you. If you had, and this is let's do the best we can. Again, for our viewers, we're doing this off the cuff, and some of these
Yeah.
questions are not easy.
Mm.
If you had to design the simplest, most useful disclosure practice tomorrow, what would it look like?
Yeah. Um, so I feel like the the biggest challenge is the tomorrow part. Because I think that that social buy-in and social connection is really the biggest part of developing any simple and easy policy. Like a simple and easy policy is one that everyone agrees with, and no one is concerned about. And you don't get any simple or easy policy unless everyone agrees. And so even the most granular disclosure policies, even the most open-ended choose your own adventure policies, like if there's not like collective awareness and buy-in and shared awareness of what this means, like there isn't an easy or simple policy. Now, in a perfect world where we did have that, let's say I'm talking to my research team where we're a pretty cohesive unit. There's five of us. Um, we could probably set up a disclosure policy that's simple and easy. What would it be? I would say that, like, for me, I'm more interested in overall use as opposed to granularity. So I've seen policies that say, did you do editing? Did you do reviewing? Did you do researching? Did you do grammar? I'm not as interested in that because one, I don't think that information gives a lot of usefulness to me. Like if I'm reviewing for a journal article and someone says I used AI for everything, like that doesn't mean much to me. Like if it's correct research that makes sense and has well structured and formatted research questions that are answered appropriately for the field, like great. Like if it doesn't go against the journal policies, great. Like you used AI, great. But I would prefer a disclosure policy that says I used AI in the development of this work for X, Y, and Z reasons. And like those are up to you. Like you can say because I was working in a greenfield area that I didn't know much about, or because I was iterating on some complex ideas, right? These are not categories that you can like put together very easily, but I think that would be like the most honest thing. Now, the most honest thing for some people would be I used AI because I was running out of time on this deadline. I think all of us would say that at some point, and I don't know when we get to that level of disclosure, but
That's confession at that point.
yeah, right. It's a confession. But so I think letting people say I used AI and here's why um, starts that conversation in a way that, if especially if it's in a classroom, and then you can say like, well, that seems like that goes against what we're trying to achieve here. Like, what can let's talk about that. How do we go about that? This gets harder and harder the larger number of students you have in a class, 30, 55, 75, 150. Obviously, these negotiations and these conversations get harder. It is difficult to engage 150 conversations at once with 150 students. So this is even this like simple and easy is like no by no means simple and easy, um, but that's what I would go to is like anything that we can get people to say, I'm comfortable saying, here's why I did it. Here's why I'm using it. And, and for you, it might be like, I used AI on this because I use AI in everything I do. That's not true for me. I don't use AI in everything I do for a variety of reasons, because there's lots of different contexts that I work in where my audience is still unsure about some of these things. And so, instead of going through this is why I think about disclosure all the time. Because there are times where I would just not use AI instead of going through the disclosures, because the disclosures would be challenging for my audience in ways that I don't want to challenge them. Like the content that I'm working with is more important than going through the ethical and appropriate disclosure process for this audience. Other times for other audiences, like I know that they're not concerned. And so then I don't disclose because they don't care. And so like, but then there's places where we do care and people want to know and we have those engagements. So it's headline social scientist tells people to do social science. But like that's what I see it as is that this is a social engagement, a social process, and implementation doesn't go in a straight line. And the easiest way to do it is to just start building those bridges and working through those challenges. And some of those conversations are going to be hard and bad. And that is just part of the implementation process.
And I think that's also part of the human process, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When we have conversations about trust, disclosure,
Yeah.
it's going to be complicated. But
Yeah.
as you're saying, and I think what we can leave our viewers and listeners with, it's about discussion. Start the
Yeah.
discussion. Do
Yeah.
it locally,
Hmm.
work with the other context that what you're
Hmm.
in,
Hmm.
and it will evolve. So, Stephen, it has been such a pleasure chatting with you,
Yeah.
learning from you, as it always is.
Thank
Um,
you.
for those of you watching us, please connect with Stephen and I on LinkedIn. Continue to follow our work and Humans in the Loop and join our conversation. We're excited to learn right along with you. So take care, everyone, and be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.